I'm Katie Lusso. This is Frank Salvedo, a criminal defense attorney, our legal expert. Just to start off, I do want to let everyone know at home that if you're watching this, you can text us any questions you might have for Frank. I know we've heard a lot. So if you have any questions, you could text us at 202-895-5599. Again, that number there on your screen, 202-895-5599. All right, Frank. Wow. I mean, Brendan took the stand yesterday. That was a surprise in itself. I know you watched that kind of unfold live with me. You were just as shocked as I was. And then we saw him on the stand there today. We saw him being peppered with questions by his defense attorney, John Carroll. And then the prosecution took over. Let's go back to the beginning here, if you will, Frank. I do have some clips that I'd love to play for you of kind of the highlights of his testimony yesterday. But before we play that, I want to talk briefly about what we just saw happen before court went to lunch. So they're going to be on about an hour-long lunch break. What was that all about?
The question at the end?
Yeah, so we heard Brendan Banfield ask the judge, Judge Penny Ascarati, can I ask you a question? And she said, maybe check with your lawyer first. And then there was that weird exchange.
It seemed like it was something to do with perhaps him viewing the exhibits that were on the screen.
Okay.
It was something logistical, I think. So I don't think it was anything major. Mm-hmm. I was interested when the defense attorney said it wasn't an appropriate question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what happened. We might see that once Mr. Carroll starts his redirect. It seems to me like it was something ministerial or logistic, but we'll see.
Is it common that a person on trial would turn to the judge and say, I want to ask you a question, or was that odd to you?
That is definitely not common.
Okay.
Usually you want to keep the judge on your side. You don't want to directly address the judge. That was a little bit awkward and uncommon. Mm-hmm. He's been in the courtroom a lot. He is a federal law enforcement officer. He knows his way around testifying. So that was unusual, which leads me to believe it was something ministerial or logistical. We'll see if something comes out in the redirect.
All right, let's take you back to yesterday when Brendan Banfield first took the stand. Again, he is on trial for murder, accused of killing his wife, Christine Banfield, and another man named Joseph Ryan. If we could play you some of those clips from yesterday, I would love to take a listen to that.
All right, call Brendan Banfield.
All right.
Did you love your wife?
Very much.
Did you want to continue your marriage with your wife?
Yes.
Did you have a relationship with Juliana Perez Magahais?
Yes. The relationship started as professional in October of 2021. In August, Juliana and I were home alone. Juliana started texting me while I was complaining about her dating activity. Quite a few screenshots of her dating app. I believe it was Hinge. The people that were in the Hinge app all had similar names to me. Their names were Brendan and Brandon and Brennan. Described people that she was interested in, people that were taller, people that were older, and it appeared to me that she was, along with the photos, the screenshots that she had shown me of people that she had matched with, that she was basically describing me. Scooted her seat closer to mine a couple times.
And so what did you do at that point?
I did not stop her advances. She came with me into my bedroom. She was concerned that I was going to tell Christine and that she was going to be essentially fired and sent back and lose her job, which I indicated that I wasn't going to tell her. Also indicated to her that I had previous affairs, and that really this was just an affair, that I have had affairs previously, and that there's nothing that changes in mine and Christine's relationship.
Now, was Christine aware of your affair?
I don't believe she was aware of the affair between me and Juliana.
Was she aware of your previous affairs?
She was aware of at least 2 previous affairs.
Okay, and likewise, were you aware of her affairs?
Yes, I was also aware that she had affairs.
Do you ever create any sort of a plan with Juliana?
No, there was no plan. At this point, our relationship is maybe 6 to 8 weeks old. I think that it's an absurd line of questioning for something that is not serious, that a plan was made to get rid of my wife. That is absolutely crazy.
All right, Frank, so that was yesterday's testimony, and I'm going to have you kind of delve into that a little bit in just a moment. We do have Matthew Torres standing by. He just got out of the courtroom, so I want to get to him. Matthew, you know, we've been watching this testimony from Brendan Banfield for several hours. It has been tense. It's been emotional. There's been a lot of details coming out. How are the jurors reacting to Brendan? Frank and I are going to discuss kind of the details of what happened, but I would love to hear from you. You know, we can't see the jurors' faces. How are they reacting to him?
They're giving really different reaction depending on the juror, and it seems like, you know, one who's always been kind of leaning forward is doing that more so. The other who's kind of been looking away to the gallery has been doing more so. But specifically when he was discussing entering that bedroom with his gun drawn, really all of the jurors, as I've said before, were locked in, were really paying attention to what he said. There were a couple of them really kind of leaning forward. There was one gentleman at the end there who was kind of leaning backwards. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether or not they're convinced by what Brendan Banfield is saying there on the stand, because there are points where maybe one other juror starts looking bored, starts looking up, but still somewhat taking notes. There are a couple people who have been really intent on taking notes. There's one older lady at the back corner. She's kind of looking downward sometimes. She looks at Banfield, she looks at us. And there were maybe 2 to 3 jurors where their hand is like on their chin like this, or their hand is kind of on their forehead. There's one woman on the front row specifically, as he was discussing kind of the stab wounds, how his finger was in her neck because they were so deep. Her brow was just kind of frowned and her hand was on her chin. And she kind of maintained that look throughout his entire testimony, at least today. And so it's really fascinating to kind of determine and figure out what they're thinking at this moment. Do they believe what Banfield is saying? As you saw there from Jenna Sands just moments ago, really trying to poke holes in his testimony, hammering him with a bunch of questions of why he didn't do this, if he felt that it was a dangerous situation. And so a lot of going back and forth too, almost like a little bit of a tennis match as far as the swivel of the necks there from the jurors, as she was really peppering him with a lot of questions.
Yeah, and Matthew, thank you for that. I know that also yesterday the body camera footage that we heard last week was released. I'm trying to get clarity on if we do have the edited version of what you put together yesterday available to play, but I know you wanted to talk briefly about it, and then maybe we can play that video when Matthew's ready.
Yeah, I think it was certainly a moment last week. It was roughly 50 minutes long, and we were able to hear the audio. We weren't able to watch it last week. Obviously, that video has now been unsealed, but it was really fascinating to look at the jurors. Even though there were moments where Banfield appeared to be crying right there as this video was being played, the jurors really just kept their eyes on the screen, watching every single moment. There was a point where we were questioning if they were trying to look at his demeanor, whether or not he truly was emotional. All of that really came to play when we watched the video finally, when we were able to see it unsealed yesterday.
Do you have that package? So we're going to play the clip you edited together, kind of explaining the body camera footage.
Can you have someone check with him again?
In this newly unsealed body cam video, we see the moment doctors tell Brendan Banfield that his wife, Christine, has died.
Your wife has died.
A provider tries to comfort Banfield as he keeps his head down, appearing to weep.
I'm so
She offers to let him wash his hands so he could feel better. His hands were covered with blood, Christine's blood.
I was trying to apply pressure.
Yeah. I mean, those were enormous wounds, and it's not.
There were so many.
Everything that was possible to be done was done for her right away. You did a wonderful, you did everything that was possible. It's not a survivable injury.
But despite the emotions we hear, prosecutors say it was Banfield who stabbed his wife multiple times in the neck in the Reston home.
The guy was, I don't know.
That's after prosecutors argue he and his au pair, Juliana Perez Magalhaes, shot and killed a stranger named Joseph Ryan. They're accused of luring Ryan and attempting to frame him using a fetish website. About an hour earlier, you see Banfield getting on his knees in his bathroom as officers investigate the bedroom where Christine and Ryan were attacked. Prosecutors argue the au pair moved into that same room, continuing their relationship after the murders.
Where's my daughter?
From the time Banfield was escorted out of the home to being evaluated by medics,
where did all this blood come from,
I was holding her neck.
he asked for updates on Christine and his 4-year-old daughter, who was inside the home at the time of the killings. He appeared to cry throughout the entire ambulance ride, and up until the moment he asked a chaplain for prayers.
We ask that you surround her with your love, that she might feel that and know that you are with her. Lord, we ask that you...
Of course, you can watch that video now on WSA9.com. Something to note as well, Katie, before I send things over to you. We obviously saw Banfield appearing to wipe away tears during this trial. We were paying attention to what his emotions would be on the stand. So far, none of that emotions when talking about the death of his wife. Katie?
All right, thank you so much, Matthew. And I know that you're going to be staying in the courtroom and continuing to watch as we continue to hear from Brendan Banfield. Frank, they wrapped up with the prosecution. She finished her cross-examination, but now the defense is going to be able to go back in and question him some more. Let's go back to the initial first time we heard Brendan up on the stand there, and that was yesterday. I know we played some clips for everyone. What was your initial reaction to seeing him up there and the words coming out of his mouth?
Well, I was definitely surprised that he took the stand. As we talked about, that is a high-risk, high-reward move. I think it's something that Mr. Banfield probably advocated for, given the state of the evidence. Definitely surprised to see him up there. There was a lot of issues that he had to work his way through. There's a lot of bad facts for him. He did work his way through those. I think his approach is, I'm going to just admit to all of my dirty laundry, so to speak. He went through other affairs that he had.
Right.
He talked about in direct and cross-examination that he had met other women and had affairs with them. He then kind of brushed Christine with some dirty laundry of his allegation about her having an affair.
Right.
Still don't know what the status of that is, whether that was true or not. But he had a lot to deal with. There's a lot of bad facts for him in terms of the personal circumstances. His relationship with Juliana, his prior affairs,
Right.
those are all terrible facts for him. Probably the logistics of what actually happened is probably a stronger point for him than all the build-up regarding his relationship with Juliana. So to sum it up, really surprised he took the stand. I think it was something that he advocated for. I wouldn't say he forced his way onto the stand. He hasn't shown a ton of emotion, but that's probably the product of nerves, and that he has probably rehearsed this to some extent with his attorney. So sometimes you lose emotion when you say something over and over. So to sum it up, surprise, bad facts to deal with, and he's worked his way through those bad facts. It'll be up to the jury to decide. You see from Matthew's reporting, seems to be a difference of opinion on the jury panel. Some are looking at him with a very furrowed brow, so to speak. Some are just sort of sitting back. I think it's really impossible to read the tea leaves there.
Right.
I've had juries that have sat back and been very relaxed that have ended up with a bad verdict, a conviction, from my perspective. But I've had juries that have been sitting back and you get a great verdict. Really tough to tell what a juror is thinking. They've settled into a pattern. We'll see what they ultimately think. There could be a difference of opinion here. Again, that's something we talked about over the past couple of weeks, whether a hung jury is a possibility.
Well, let me ask you this. You know, we're not seeing him, he's not being painted as a great guy, right? But I think the question many people are probably asking is, well, he seems like he wasn't a great guy, but does that mean he murdered his wife?
That's exactly it. And that's the defense's approach. They pretty much said, listen, we are going to acknowledge all of this bad stuff rather than to run from it. Now, you saw when Jenna Sands started off, she started off her cross-examination on a topic that I thought was a little bit quasi-inappropriate, and I think Mr. Carroll objected at the bench because she started asking him questions about why he hasn't told this version or this story before. And that was even after he had counsel. And typically you have the right to remain silent. You're already protected by an attorney. There are some twists and turns in this case. But then once she got into the dirty laundry part, I think she scored some points on him in terms of his relationship, his love for Juliana. I thought she scored some pretty good points there.
She brought up a lot there.
Him. But I think the defense's perspective was like, we're going to own all the bad stuff, and then hopefully the jury will put that aside and really concentrate on the facts of what happened. But I don't know if those two are separable.
All right, so we're going to talk more about the prosecutor, because I remember when we were watching it, you were like, oh, no, don't do that. Actually, you know what, let's get into that first. The danger there, I think you said the word mistrial. The judge could have called that a mistrial. What is the danger with her walking that line? Obviously, he does have the right to not speak, or but...
So the judge overruled that objection, but as soon as I saw that line of questioning, you and I discussed it for a second. It's just that after somebody has, and there are twists and turns in this case, there are footnotes, there are other issues because he was going to testify for Juliana and everything, and I understand that. But once she started to go down the road of, well, you haven't told this story before or talked to the police before about what you're telling this jury, that was kind of after he already had an attorney, and no attorney would allow their client in this circumstance to go in and give a freewheeling interview to the police. So that was kind of, and I think what Mr. Carroll objected to, that was kind of a slap to his right to remain silent, especially after he's represented. She was kind of commenting on that. So he did go up to the bench, and typically the way that works is the defense attorney will make an objection, the court will rule on it. She overruled the objection, but he probably preserved that for purposes of an appeal, because now if he is convicted, then the defense can go to the Court of Appeals and say, hey, listen, the judge allowed that line of questioning on the main witness in the case, and that could be a problem on appeal. Again, there are some nuances here, there are some twists and turns, but I think that's what was going on when he objected to that initial line of questioning. I was surprised she started off with that. I probably would have started off with all the dirty laundry, which then she right away got into.
She got there.
And then she started to score some points.
Well, let me ask you this. A lot of people have been commenting, is he going to be able to appeal this if he does get convicted because of ineffective counsel? But was this the first, I know you said no, likely not, but was this the first moment where you were like, oh my goodness, he could appeal this if he gets convicted?
Sure. There's a number of issues that have come up in the case. There's some pretrial litigation that came up. That could be a grounds of appeal if he's convicted. Also, every time there's an objection to some evidence coming in or being excluded, that is another possible basis for an appeal. But in order to win an appeal on a case like this, if it's on the defense perspective, it has to be something really significant. It has to be something that's prejudicial to the trial. And yeah, commenting on somebody's right to remain silent starts to go into that territory. So anything that comes up during the trial, the court reporter's there, the judge is ruling, overruling, or sustaining, anything like that is a potential grounds for appeal.
All right, so stay tuned on that. If you do have questions for Frank, you can text us at 202-895-5599. Again, that number is 202-895-5599. All right, so Frank, you're joining us now, and we left off with the prosecution, but I would love if we could go back a little bit, and I'd love to play you some clips from earlier and just kind of get your reaction to these moments. And this is when Brendan Banfield is on the stand and being questioned by the defense. This first one I want to play for you. It's the initial conversation he says that he had with Juliana when he first pulled up to the home, and that conversation was he told her to stay in the car. Can we take a listen to that?
I told Juliana to stay at the car.
Okay, and what about regard to Valerie?
I didn't address Valerie specifically, but they were in the car, and I had just told Juliana specifically to stay at the car.
In doing that, was it your intent that she would stay with?
Yes.
Okay. At that point, after you told her.
All right, so that was that initial, conversation he says was had with Juliana. Talk to me about your reaction to that moment.
That's a tough moment for him to explain. The logistics of the shooting, I think, are explainable, and I think that was explained by Mr. Banfield.
Right.
But the lead up, the McDonald's, the stay in the car, the daughter being in the house, those are not tremendous facts for him. But that's something he has to deal with. Those are facts that the defense had to deal with. They worked their way through them. Like I said, I don't know if it's going to be successful or not. This is the peril when you put your client up there, or when he demands to be up there. He had to answer some really difficult questions, and Jenna Sands got to those eventually in her cross-examination.
She did, and my perspective on this was that he's trying to immediately off the bat paint this picture of that Juliana doesn't listen, Juliana does her own thing. Do you think this is going to switch over to him trying to put the blame on Juliana? Because we already heard him talking about Christine, and while he said that she in the past had implied she was into some of these bondage things and other things that he says he was not into, but do you think we're going to see him switch the blame to Juliana instead of Christine, or what's going to happen here?
That's a really good question. It seemed like there was some shotgun approach. My approach is usually more of a straightforward approach and going with one defense. There's a little shotgun approach here. The jury could be sitting back thinking, well, wait a second, and some of your viewers have commented, wow, Juliana got a great deal. She got manslaughter. Like, why would we treat the two of them any differently? Now, I understand the reasons why, that he is purportedly the planner according to the Commonwealth's theory, but perhaps the jury's thinking this is a heat of passion thing. There's some reasonable doubt about whether this was a premeditated plan. So maybe there is a feeling that the defense is kind of throwing out the possibility of a manslaughter lesser offense.
Which is what Juliana's charged with.
To kind of treat them both the same. Like, why should they be treated differently?
Right.
I understand people will say, well, there's good reasons to treat them differently. But they seem to be throwing out a little manslaughter, heat of passion defense. They're also throwing out a little bit of Juliana's a wild card. She didn't listen. She, according to his testimony, kind of seduced him, showed him names that were similar to his about guys that she was having some contact with over dating, right? And that she wasn't successful. So there's sort of this implication that she's a wild card, she's seducing him, she's doing her own thing, she doesn't listen. She was able to get the combination to the safe by a little bit of sitting next to him and seeing the combination. So there's a little bit of dirtying up of Juliana, and maybe part of the defense, and perhaps a jury is thinking, well, maybe Juliana set this whole thing up in order to be with him versus Christine, or a combination. It's really a shotgun approach in order to get one or two jurors to have that reasonable doubt. Because 12 of them are going to go back there and they're going to talk about it. And maybe if there's all different theories about what the evidence shows, then I think the defense is hoping that that's a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, and again, you've talked about this at length, but he doesn't have to prove who did it here. He doesn't have to prove Brendan did or didn't do it. He just has to make people question if somebody else could have done it. Because once you start thinking somebody else could have done it, then you can't say without a reasonable doubt that it was Brendan.
Right. So, and in Virginia, the judge will give instructions that it's not a probability of guilt. It's
Right.
not a suspicion of guilt. It's not just because he's charged. It has to be proof beyond any reasonable doubt. And reasonable doubt is sometimes not defined under Virginia law and certainly not under federal law. But some judges have described it, even in federal cases, as a reasonable doubt is the same thing as a hesitation to act in an important matter in your own life.
Okay.
So in other words, if this evidence was about, and this is oftentimes a closing argument that I will give, if this evidence was not about Mr. Banfield, if this evidence was about whether your child should have open heart surgery, would you go ahead and go forward with that open heart surgery, or would you get a second opinion or a third opinion? Are you that convinced by Juliana and the Commonwealth's case to go forward with an important matter in your own life, such as your child's surgery, or to buy a house, which is obviously less important? So when you put it in that context, sometimes people will say, well, wait a second, I would hesitate to make that action, so therefore I have reasonable doubt.
All right, I do see a lot of questions coming in. We're going to get to those in just a moment. So thank you everyone who is sending them in. If you have questions, you see the number there down on the screen. It's 202-895-5599. We will get to those questions, I promise you, in just a moment. Frank, I do want you to listen to a couple more clips, though, from earlier today. Let's play this next one about when he hears the moaning. The reason he says he goes up the stairs, he says he hears moaning. And remember, he came into the home. He says Juliana followed him into the home, even though he had told her to stay outside. And Juliana, when she followed him into the home, she brought the little girl with them. A lot going on here, but this is when he tells John Carroll he heard some noise upstairs. Take a listen.
I heard sounds from upstairs.
Okay. And what, if anything, did you do at that point?
I moved closer to the upstairs. I moved closer to the upstairs stairs, to the stairs heading upstairs, but still on the main floor, where the sound seemed to be coming from. There's regular ceiling over the kitchen and living room area, but in the foyer area that leads to upstairs, which is where I heard the sounds coming from.
Okay. And what, if anything, did you hear?
I heard the sounds of, I would say, moaning, as well as sound of skin-on-skin contact.
And what did you think was going on at that point?
Sex.
Okay. Why didn't you call 911 at that point?
Well, I believe that it was an affair that was going on at that point. That doesn't seem like an emergency for the police to be involved in, was my thought at that moment.
So a lot to unpack there. He's explaining why he didn't decide to call police, and that's a question we've seen pop up in the comments numerous times. You pull up to the home, you're supposedly being told by Juliana that there's an intruder in your home, you go into the home, you don't call 911, you stay in the home, you hear moaning, you still don't call 911, then you go upstairs because you think the noise has turned to violence, and you still don't call 911. You have him up there on the stand. He's your client. What are your thoughts on the way he's answering these questions and the language he's using? I mean, I've never heard anyone say skin-to-skin contact.
Well, first, I think what you just summarized in your question is the prosecutor's closing statement. So I think if you could take that 30-second clip and put it in Jenna Sands' closing, I think that would be the closing.
You're welcome.
A lot of it just doesn't make good sense. Right. And then you never know when your client is going to get up there, or any witness, whether they are going to stumble along and say something that is, I wouldn't say it's outlandish, but it's approaching outlandish when he said skin-to-skin contact, and that's what he assumed was going on, but it was not 911-able, is essentially what he's saying. That was a really difficult moment for him. As we've talked about, he has to be close to perfect. And people think, well, on the defense side, you just have to create reasonable doubt. But no, when in a case like this, where your client testifies, you, and I mean the defense attorney and the client, because you can't control every answer, have to be perfect. And any misstep, like we've discussed, can be fatal. And that was a potential misstep. That was something that was cringeworthy for sure. Again, there's 12 jurors.
Right.
Maybe some took that and found some truth in it, or found that it was not particularly important to everything else that had happened. But that was certainly not the greatest testimony that I've ever heard from a defense.
Yeah, and I do want to mention, you know, he's probably nervous. I would be nervous, right? And so you have to wonder if that's the way he talks when he's nervous. Obviously, we've only heard one other audio clip of him, and it's that 911 call where, you know, the first thing he says is, I'm a federal agent, one of the first things, and then he explains what happened. But at the end of the day, we don't know him and we don't know what his personality is. But that was definitely something that caught my attention, and I'm sure the jurors probably caught that too.
Sure, and if he wasn't nervous, then he's really, then what are we doing, right? So even an innocent person is going to portray a lot of nerves, probably be more nervous, be glancing around, looking around, sweating, that type of thing. So really can't read too much into, I think, the body part of it and whether he's looking this way or that way. He's definitely nervous. Anybody in that position would be nervous. Everybody in the courtroom is nervous. I can tell you the defense attorney is nervous, the prosecutor's nervous. That was probably the most important cross-examination that prosecutor has perhaps ever done.
Right.
So she's probably thought about that for a long time, and she showed some nerves as well. It's impossible. I've done this for a long time and have done many jury trials in federal court and death penalty cases and whatnot. If you're not nervous, then you need to quit and do something else. So he was clearly nervous. You never know how he talks normally.
Right.
But what he said was problematic versus how he said it.
Interesting. All right, let's get to some of these questions because they're kind of connected to this. The first person said, hi, Frank, will Miss Sands be questioning him after the lunch break? And also is raising a flag about when Brendan said he heard skin-on-skin noises, but then Joe Ryan was found fully clothed. The first part we can answer. Jenna Sands, actually, I think she's done with her cross. Can she be brought back up?
She can't.
Okay.
Mr. Carroll will get another chance, but no, Jenna Sands was not a lengthy cross-examination. I think she scored some points on some of the logistics leading up to it. I thought the stab wound part was not particularly effective, but certainly all of the au pair relationship, I think that was very effective. Some of the letters that they exchanged, some of the letters that Mr. Banfield, wrote to Juliana, I thought that was a very effective line of cross-examination. So no, she is done. Now Mr. Carroll will get a chance to do a rebuttal. They tossed some language out about the dog. I don't know if there's going to be any testimony from the audio expert that didn't testify last time. I don't think that will happen. But no, she is done. Mr. Carroll has one more chance, and then Mr. Banfield will go back and sit at the defense table and see what the jury ultimately decides.
Okay, at the beginning of court today, we heard Ms. Sands get up there and say to the judge that she actually would like to call a brand new witness who was brought to her attention. This is somebody who watched Brendan's testimony, and she says reached out to the Commonwealth and said, I have information that contradicts what Brendan Banfield just said up there in the stand. And we heard this conversation between the judge, Jenna Sands, and John Carroll. And John Carroll said he's just made aware of this. He needs time to think about it. Can she just bring someone new up to the stand as a witness like that?
In Virginia has traditionally, back in the day, so to speak, been more of honestly a trial by ambush state. There are very limited discovery rules, going back years, about discovery in criminal cases. You often get more discovery in a dispute about money in civil cases than you get discovery in criminal cases, traditionally. Now, that has changed over the past several years, where there is some additional discovery requirements that the Commonwealth and the defense have to provide. Also, each judge can provide his or her own discovery schedule. So in this case, it looks like the judge has said, listen, both sides have to do witness lists. We need exhibits beforehand. You know, she has given everybody noise in terms of how you do the exhibits. There is probably a discovery order in this case with regard to witnesses. That does happen where somebody jumps out of the blue and says, oh my God, I'd listened to this testimony and I want to come in and this is all, it's a little bit of and it could be completely legitimate. It would seem like, given the length and breadth of this investigation, that any witness that's out there with the press coverage and everything, any witness that is out there has probably already been contacted or interviewed. So it is definitely a surprising element that all of a sudden we have somebody whipping open the courtroom doors to say liar, right? Which is essentially what they're doing.
Yeah.
We'll see if the judge allows it.
Okay.
The judge probably will allow it if it's relevant and if it's truly somebody that has come in off the street with new information that nobody knows about. It's kind of a rare circumstance. She may allow it. I would think it'll be very brief. She's not going to allow a long-winded, expansive witness to come in that's not on any kind of witness list.
You know, Frank, I know you are a criminal defense attorney. Have you ever prosecuted a case?
I am not.
Okay. So, but you've been in the room with a lot of prosecutors, so you know how they act. How do you think she's doing?
I think she did really well once she got into, like we talked about, when you cross-examine, and it's no different cross-examining an accused versus a cooperator. And you see some parallels between what Mr. Carroll did and what Ms. Sands did. Mr. Carroll said, hey, Juliana, you didn't tell this story until you got all the discovery in the case. She really did the same thing. So that kind of doing the same thing. If I'm cross-examining a cooperator, kind of like prosecuting that cooperator. So she did a very good job once she got into the successful stuff. You always want to start off with the successful stuff, the easy stuff. Get him to admit A, B, and C. Once she got into that, she did really well. Talking about his keeping himself silent, that was a little bit iffy. But once she got into the good stuff, she kept it short, she kept it punchy. That's been kind of her theme throughout all the cross-examinations. I think she did a good job on those big points. And she'll bring it all together in closing, which is really going to be the most important part from now on.
All right, well, somebody else asked, a follow-up question to that. Do you think Mr. Carroll is doing a good job with Banfield on the stand? So specifically the Brendan Banfield portion. Obviously, Brendan is a strong personality, it seems. Do you think Mr. Carroll is handling that exam or that testimony well?
I think he's handling it well. It's a difficult situation, difficult client, difficult facts, right? So he's driving through a snowstorm and he's trying to make his way through some really difficult icy patches. I think he's doing a good job with what he has. Like we talked about yesterday, this case isn't a beautiful filet mignon. This case is a lot of hamburger that he's trying to piece together. He may not have expected some of those answers from his client. So once your client is up there on the stand, you've lost control of your client and you have to then deal with the answers that he gives. So yes, despite what some folks might think, I think both lawyers, both sides, under a tremendous amount of pressure. Remember, there are lives at stake. The humanity of this, their lives have been lost. His life is at stake. You have a almost 8-year-old young daughter now whose future is going to be decided. There's a tremendous amount of pressure. And to sit back and say he's doing this right or this wrong, it's hard when you're in there and you're under the lights.
You mentioned earlier that maybe the strategy, maybe the plan is to push for that manslaughter, that heat of the moment. Somebody asked, how would heat of the moment come into it when Brendan says himself he knew his wife cheated? So did he, and he was okay with it? How does that play in?
So in order to get a jury instruction, in order to get any type of jury instruction, there has to be a scintilla of evidence or any evidence to support that instruction. So I think what Mr. Carroll will say is, listen, there's enough evidence here, Judge. It's murky enough to get a manslaughter instruction. So the jury will be instructed from the highest crime possible all the way down to potentially a manslaughter instruction. The judge will have to make that determination when they have the jury instruction conference as to whether that's even an option for the jury. Now, if the judge says, nope, I'm only given the most serious instructions, it's either, he's either getting first degree or
Yeah, I
whatever
believe
the
it's
most serious
second-degree
charge.
murder.
Yeah, if he's either getting second degree or nothing, and I'm not giving any other manslaughter or lesser included instructions, then that's what they roll with. That could be a basis for appeal. But really, it's any evidence, even a scintilla of evidence to support a theory or a charge, the judge generally has to give that instruction, has to give that option to the jury.
Yeah, and so it looks like Brendan is facing 4 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of using a firearm to commit a felony, 2 counts of child abuse with disregard for life, and 1 count of child cruelty. So those are the charges he was facing, but you're saying those charges could kind of change.
Well, the aggravated murder is the most serious. That's going to most likely carry a life sentence. But underneath that, I think Mr. Carroll will argue for, hey, listen, there are other scenarios here that might support a lesser charge, whether it's second degree or manslaughter. I haven't seen the instruction conference, but he may offer up different options. So this way, when the jury goes back, and let's say 10 people are saying he should get aggravated murder, and I'm not moving off of that, and 2 people are saying he should be acquitted, I believe it was exactly as he told us, and there's a reasonable doubt, then perhaps there's a compromise verdict where they say, all right, we'll settle on manslaughter. And that makes some sense because that's exactly what Juliana got. So that could be what's going on kind of behind the scenes, is to give the jury an ability to reach a compromise verdict.
All right, let's go back to talking about how John Carroll wrapped up his testimony with Brendan Banfield. And, you know, it ended with him talking about Christine Banfield and whether or not she was into FetLife, into that sort of thing. And Brendan said that, from what he understood, she was into that type of thing, but hadn't been in recent years. She had brought it up, but it had been several years. He said he didn't know about any plan. They went back to that language of the plan, which was part of Juliana's testimony, that Brendan came to her with this elaborate plan. The importance, in your mind, for him to end that conversation with Brendan by bringing back up the plan, what was that about?
Yeah, he was trying to end the examination on a different note, and I forget exactly what it was, but the prosecutor was able to say, wait a second, objection, that's been asked and answered, or it calls for speculation.
Yeah.
So he was at the end of his examination. He needed a few more questions to just kind of end it on a high note, so to speak. So he went back to plan and just wanted to end it with there was no plan. Now, I can guarantee you over lunchtime after that cross-examination, he's thinking about, okay, how did he get beat up in the cross-examination, and how do I repair that a little bit? I think you'll see probably a 15-20 minute guessing redirect to kind of just rehabilitate him a little bit. We'll see if they call another defense witness, unlikely, and then we'll see if the judge allows this supposedly surprise witness to walk into the courtroom unannounced and give some testimony that is apparently very bombastic and startling.
So this is definitely a working lunch for John Carroll and Brendan Banfield. They should be getting back in the courtroom in about 20 minutes or so. So let's get to some more questions. Again, if you have a question for Frank, you can text us at 202-895-5599. Again, that number is 202-895-5599. All right, so something that stuck out to me, though, other than the plan, is one of the very last things I heard Brendan Banfield say, and it caught my attention. I literally looked up to the screen. He said, "I wish I had shot him earlier." I mean, that feels like a lot to say out loud and to say in front of the juries. He's never denied shooting Joseph Ryan, but to say, "I wish I shot him earlier," do you think John Carroll was okay with him saying that, wanted him to say that?
I don't know if it was the ideal answer. I would say it was less than ideal from a defense perspective. I think he said he waited less than a minute or about a minute. I think he said less than a minute before he shot Mr. Ryan. And Jenna Sands did a nice job to say, okay, 1, 2, 3. And when you really think about a minute's time, that is a long, long time. So I think the jury might be questioning, well, why would he wait so long if his wife is being stabbed like that? So he had to say something, but probably the choice of words was less than ideal. Maybe he could have phrased it as, Looking back on it, I am disappointed in myself that I did not stop this attack sooner, and I should have ended this attack sooner,
Yeah.
versus I wish I shot him earlier.
Right, it was the language for me that was startling almost, because he was saying what you just said in different words. He was saying, my wife was being attacked, I wish I had saved her, but that's not what came out of his mouth. What came out of his mouth was very powerful for me to listen to, at least.
There's a lot of things that have come out of his mouth that were slightly cringeworthy. But does a jury look at that and say, okay, he just bared his soul, he admitted all of his dirty
He's being
laundry,
truthful.
he's being truthful, he didn't hold anything back? I could see at least 1 or 2 jurors on there, typically, that would say, okay, well, he's just bearing everything to us, which is better than how Juliana was. Remember the cross-examination of Juliana, she fought everything. She was very testy. She was very closed. And Mr. Carroll had to pull things out of her. And people were thinking, wow, she's being very evasive. She's being very difficult. So perhaps a jury is looking at it and comparing the two. As we've talked about, man, that is a huge risk to put him up there, because now we've kind of forgotten about Juliana. Everything is about Mr. Banfield and how he's looking and how he's acting and how he answered and whether the language is striking. We've forgotten about Juliana.
Why isn't he crying? Why isn't he emotional? There's so many things. I know one of the first questions that came out of one of my colleagues' mouth was, why isn't he emotional? He's talking about his wife supposedly being murdered and he's not showing emotion. He showed more emotion when that audio was playing in the hospital.
It went from all about Juliana to all about Mr. Banfield.
Yeah.
That's the risk. Whether he'll be rewarded or not, we'll see. But now the jury is that she's in the rearview mirror. They haven't thought about her at all.
Do they bring her back, though? Do you think this is a moment where the prosecution says, let's get her back up here to answer to some of this?
I think the prosecution has made their points with Mr. Banfield. They don't want to put Juliana back in front of the jury. That was the weakest part of their case in a way.
Really?
They want to keep her in the rearview mirror. And now successfully, because he testified, she is in the rearview mirror. All the focus was on Juliana. Everybody was asking, why did she get such a sweetheart deal and stuff? Nobody's thinking about that anymore. All they're thinking about is, does Mr. Banfield's story make sense or create reasonable doubt?
Yeah.